The first light over Meereen was the color of old blood. It came slowly through the heat haze above Slaver's Bay, staining the brick pyramids red and the low waters copper, so that every tower and dome seemed to have been dipped in fresh killing. Daenerys stood barefoot upon the terrace of the Great Pyramid and felt the warmth of the baked yellow stone under her soles. The city was waking beneath her. She heard the thin bray of donkeys in the lower alleys, the rattle of carts on old brick, the far-off chanting of freedmen greeting the dawn. Somewhere a child was laughing. Somewhere else a woman was weeping. Meereen had 1,000 voices, and none of them rested long. The wind off the bay should have been cool at that hour, but it came thick and hot, smelling of salt, fish, dung, and smoke. It lifted the loose ends of her hair and pressed her linen to her skin. Daenerys narrowed her eyes against it and watched the ships beyond the harbor mouth, each no more than a dark thorn upon the gleaming water. Some came with figs, oil, tin, wine, or wool. Some came with words. Too many came with lies. Your Grace. Barristan's voice was soft, but there was iron beneath it. The captain is here. She turned. The old knight had come in his white cloak despite the heat, the silk gone yellow at the folds, his lined face grave. Beside him stood Missandei in pale lavender, solemn as a little priestess, and behind them 3 sailors waited on their knees with eyes downcast. One was gray-bearded and broad across the chest, with salt baked white upon his boots and soot worked into the seams of his hands. The 2 behind him looked as though they had not slept in days. One had a fresh bandage around his neck. The other kept glancing toward the pyramid stair, as if he feared the stones might rise and swallow him. Upon Missandei's arms lay a length of scarlet cloth. Something heavy bent the silk. Daenerys looked first at the men. You asked for a private audience before sunrise. I have granted it. Speak. The bearded captain lifted his brow to the floor. I am Kavo Nagaris, your worship, master of the summer sea windcatcher Bright Bess. I bring a gift to the mother of dragons. The title made her flinch, though she did not show it. They gave her 12 names in Meereen, and she liked few of them. A gift, she said. From whom? From the sea, where the world ended. Resnak would have gasped at that, or crossed himself in the Giscari fashion if he had been brave enough to offend no one. Barristan only grew stiller. Look at me, Daenerys said. Kavo raised his eyes. There was fear in them, but not the ordinary fear of men brought before kings. She knew that look well. This was deeper, stranger. The man looked like someone who had seen a monster rise from the dark, and could no longer trust the dark to remain empty. What sea? She asked, though she knew. The smoking sea, your grace. He swallowed. Or near enough. We did not mean to come so far west, not with our own sails. Storm took us off Volantis and drove us hard for 3 nights. One mast cracked. We were drifting when we found the wreck. No one spoke. The wind moved through the terrace colonnade with a dry whisper. Daenerys had never seen Valyria. She had seen only paintings and heard only frightened tales. A peninsula of fire where Dragonlords had ruled half the world before the doom broke them. A place of smoking waters and ruined towers where no sane captain sailed willingly. Old stones, old blood, and curses thick enough to poison the air. Yet she was Targaryen. Valyria had lived in her all her life, in her dreams, in the pale silver of her hair, in the way fire had touched her and not consumed her. What wreck? She asked. Kavo licked cracked lips. A galley with half her oars burnt away. Volantini by the hull carvings. She drifted blackened and blind. No banner flew. Most of her crew were dead where they lay. The ones living begged water. They had taken salvage from a broken shrine on the shore of a smoking island. They said there was treasure there. His mouth twisted. They lied, or else what men call treasure is not what I thought it was. Missandei shifted the burden in her arms. The thing inside the cloth was longer than a war horn and thicker around than a man's thigh. Go on, Daenerys said. One of the survivors offered it to me for water and a clean death. Kavo's gaze flicked unwillingly to the scarlet cloth. I thought it gold beneath the soot. We took it aboard. That same night, the man who had carried it into my cabin coughed blood until his breath stopped. Before dawn, another sailor lost his wits. He said something was singing inside the hold. On the second day, my youngest mastman touched the mouthpiece and screamed. His lips blistered black. The captain's knuckles tightened against the tiles. I would have cast the thing overboard, but the dying Volantine told me it was made for dragons. And where in all this world is there a queen with dragons, if not here? Daenerys heard the words, but before she could answer, something under the scarlet cloth gave a tiny sound. It was not a true sound, more a tremor, a low shiver in the air, like the ghost of a note remembered by the stone. Every hair on her arms rose. Missandei stiffened. Barristan's hand went to his sword. "Unwrap it," Daenerys said. "Your Grace," Barristan began. "Unwrap it." Missandei lowered her eyes, obedient, and folded back the scarlet silk. The horn beneath was black as a moonless sea. Not painted black nor burned, but black, the way obsidian is black, as if darkness had been given shape and polished until it drank the dawn. 3 bands encircled it, metal the color of dried red wine, worked with little glyphs so fine they seemed to writhe if one looked too long. At the mouth flared a lip of pale metal that was not silver and not steel. The curve of the thing was graceful as a dragon's neck. The body of it was engraved with Old Valyrian signs so minute and exact that they caught the red morning and held it like embers. The sight of it struck her harder than she would have thought possible. Not because it was lovely, though it, in a cruel way. Not because it had come from the bones of Old Valyria. Because it looked made for her. Some part of her knew at once that this object did not belong among the brick, dust, and brass of Meereen. It belonged beside dragon skulls in a dark hall, beneath banners embroidered with 3-headed beasts, where silver-haired kings had whispered over fire and planned the world's undoing. "Leave us," Barristan said sharply to the sailors. Daenerys lifted a hand. "No, let them stay." The old knight's eyes met hers. He did not like that. She could see it. He feared traps, poison, hidden knives, the 1,000 ordinary deaths that hunted queens. Yet even Barristan's distrust seemed almost small beside the presence of the horn. She stepped down from the dais. Missandei did not move. The child was brave, but Daenerys saw the pulse beating in her throat. Slowly, carefully, Daenerys laid her fingers along the black curve. It was warm. Not with sun heat. The terrace stones had only just begun to warm. This was deeper, like touching a living throat where blood ran close to the skin. The breath went out of her. Below them, deep under the Great Pyramid, a roar slammed into the stone. One roar, then another. The sound came up through floor and column alike, shuddering in the bones of the terrace. Viserion screamed. Rhaegal answered him with a rage so wild that a shower of dust rattled from the nearest arch. The 2 dragons had been chained under the pyramid for many days now, ever since she had locked them away after the Black One had taken the child from her father's arms. They never rested quietly for long, but this was different. This was no hunger cry, no fury at their chains. They sounded like beasts smelling blood from miles away. Kavo dropped his face to the floor and began muttering prayers in Valyrian. Missandei almost let go of the horn. Barristan drew his sword with a long hiss of steel. "Back away from it." Daenerys did not. She stood very still, hand upon the black surface, while the dragons below beat the air with their wings and roared against the weight of chains. Heat bloomed under her palm. For one bright and terrible heartbeat, she felt as if something on the other end of the world had lifted its head and taken notice of her. Then it was gone. The warmth remained. The dragons quieted by slow degrees, falling from thunder into growls, from growls into a harsh, restless scraping of claws against stone. No one moved. At last Daenerys withdrew her hand. "The sailors will be paid," she said. Kavo blinked as if he had not expected to leave the terrace alive. "Paid, your grace? With silver and fresh water and a place in the lower harbor until your mast is mended." You will speak to no one of what you brought me. If you do, I will have your tongue." She turned to Barristan. "Send brazen beasts to guard their ship." "Yes, your grace," he said, though his eyes were still on the horn. She looked at the thing again. It seemed smaller now that it was silent and more dangerous. "Bring it inside." "Your grace," Barristan said again, more urgently. "Whatever that is, it is no gift." "No," Daenerys said. "It is not." She let Missandei cover it once more in scarlet silk, but even beneath the cloth it seemed to stain the light around it. As they carried it through the cool, shaded passages of the pyramid, servants flattened themselves against the walls, not because they knew what passed, but because something in the air told them to fear. Daenerys felt their eyes on her, felt the whisper of old fire at her back, and knew with a certainty that made her almost dizzy that the day had opened a door which would not be shut again. By the time she reached her solar, the sun stood clear above the harbor. Meereen glittered and stank and sang outside the carved stone windows. Within, the horn waited on a cedar table like a sleeping serpent. Daenerys sent everyone away except Missandei and Barristan. Only when the door closed did she say, very softly, "If this came from the smoking sea, then Valyria has sent me its answer." Barristan's lined face might have been carved from old oak. "Valyria sent its answer to many, your grace. I have never heard that any man was glad of it." She looked down at the scarlet cloth in the darkness beneath. Yet when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the living warmth against her hand, and far below, behind iron and stone, her dragons were stirring in their chains. By nightfall, the horn had become the center of the room and of every thought in it. Daenerys had ordered the shutters open to admit whatever breeze the dark might grant, but the air remained close. Lamps of perfumed oil burned low in niches along the green and gold tiled walls, and their flames made little amber ladders in the polished black of the horn. It lay uncovered now upon a table of cedar and ebony, its red metal bands gleaming like old wounds. Outside, Meereen glimmered under the stars. Torchlight moved along the terraces. The night markets still muttered beyond the lower walls. In the alleys, the freedmen sang their rough songs to the moon. Twice she heard distant shouting, once the thin cry of someone dying. A queen in Meereen slept within 1,000 breaths of murder every night. Missandei stood on a stool so she might bend more easily over the engravings. She had washed the ash from the horn with hot water and vinegar while Daenerys watched. The water had turned the color of rust. Now the child touched one tiny glyph with the tip of a reed and frowned as if the shape resisted her. "It is Valyrian," she said at last. "And not." She looked troubled. "Some marks are High Valyrian, but older, bent. Like words one hears through a wall." Barristan folded his hands behind his back. "Can you read them?" "A little." She moved the reed lower. "This one is blood. This one is fire." Her dark eyes lifted. "This one is bind, maybe, or yoke, or claim." Daenerys sat by the window, elbows on the carved stone sill, chin upon her hands. She had changed from court silk into a sleeveless gown of pale linen, but the heat still clung to her. Sweat shone at her collarbone. "And the rest?" Missandei hesitated. "No mortal breath, or no living breath. I think." The child bit her lip. "The line is broken. The glyphs have been scarred as if by heat. Here it says dragon plain enough. Here." Her little fingers hovered over the inner curve of the bell. "Master, or perhaps Rhaegal. Old Valyrian can be proud. It likes one word to mean 10 things." That was true. High Valyrian had been a tongue fit for kings and spells and commands shouted from Dragonback. Meanings layered within meanings. Daenerys knew enough of it to speak with dignity and to issue simple orders. Enough to feel the old blood waking sometimes when the syllables rolled off her tongue. Yet what she knew had come from exile, from memory fragments, from a brother who had loved the sound of lost grandeur more than he had ever loved her. What had been carved upon this horn belonged to a deeper well. Barristan stepped nearer, studying the bands without touching them. At King's Landing there was once a maester who spoke often of Old Valyria. Septon Barth's writings, he called them. Prince Rhaegar listened when he had the leisure. The old knight's mouth tightened at the memory. Barth believed dragons were not truly beasts, not as horses are beasts or hounds. He thought there were arts, songs, and blood rites in their making. Arts better forgotten. Daenerys turned from the window. Did he speak of horns? Not to me. Barristan looked at the black curve. But the old stories are full of devices meant to master what should not be mastered. Glass candles. Dragon eggs fed with king's blood. Valyrian steel forged in spells. Why should a horn be less dangerous? Because it is mine, she almost said. The thought shamed her. She bit it back. It was not hers. It had found her, perhaps. That was different, and not better. Missandei traced another line and sucked in a breath. Your Grace. What is it? The child extended the reed. When I touch the marks too long, they grow warm. Daenerys rose and came to the table. Barristan made a low sound of protest, but she ignored him. The horn did feel warmer than before. Not hot. Not enough to burn. Yet it had gathered heat in the cool of the chamber as though the lamp flames fed it. She leaned over the curve and saw now that the tiny signs along the red metal band were not merely engraved. They had been inlaid with something paler, some metal or stone that caught light and gave it back red. What did they say? She asked. Missandei swallowed. Blood for fire, fire for blood. She spoke the Valyrian words after, soft and careful, and the room seemed to narrow around them. Daenerys closed her fingers over the table's edge. There had been blood and fire around her all her life. Her first memory was of running barefoot through a house with a red door while a storm beat at the world beyond. Her second was of Viserys speaking of what had been stolen from them. Always blood. Always fire. Her dragons had hatched in both. Enough, Barristan said. Cover it and lock it away. Would you have me lock away my dragons too? Daenerys asked before she could stop herself. The old knight met her gaze without flinching. If dragons could be locked away safely, perhaps the world would be gentler. She could not bear that answer. The world was not gentle before dragons, she said. Nor after. Men do not need dragons to burn children. The words hung between them. Barristan bowed his head. No, Your Grace. Silence came down then, heavy and close. At last Daenerys laid the scarlet cloth over the horn herself. The touch of the silk made it look more dangerous, not less, as if one might cover a severed head and persuade oneself it did not exist. She should have left it there. She knew that. She should have posted guards, barred the chamber, and turned her face to matters of grain, treaties, corpses in the alleys, and the thousand steady tasks of rule. Instead, she said, "Take me to them." Barristan's answer was immediate. No. She gave him a hard look. You swore to obey me. I swore to protect you, and I am telling you where I go. Missandei's hands tightened in her skirts. Your Grace, perhaps it is better to wait until morning. If the dragons answered it once, they may answer it again. Daenerys reached for the cloth-wrapped horn. I would know why. Barristan's face showed the battle in him, knightly obedience against old man's dread. At last he exhaled through his nose. Then I go before you, as you like. The descent into the lower dark of the pyramid seemed longer than ever that night. Torchlight leaned and wavered on the walls as they went down winding passages cut through the old brick heart of Meereen. The deeper they climbed, the hotter it became. The smell changed as well. Up above there had been perfume, oil, and stone. Below there was smoke, damp mortar, old meat, and the sharp rank scent of dragon. Two unsullied opened the bronze doors to the pit and lowered their spears in salute. Daenerys heard the chains first. Not the full crashing noise of rage, merely a slow drag of link over stone, patient as a knife being sharpened. The pit had once been a feasting hall for dead kings, or some broad cellar for grain, but now it was a place remade by fire. Soot blackened the arches. The far corners vanished into shadow. Broken bones lay under drifts of old ash where the keepers had been careless. In the center of the chamber, great iron rings had been bolted into the stone, and from them ran the chains that held her children. Viserion was awake. The cream and gold dragon crouched with wings half furled, eyes bright as molten brass. He saw her and hissed. Rhaegal lay farther back, green scales dim in the torchlight, head on his forelegs. When he lifted it, the bronze along his neck flashed. Daenerys felt the familiar ache at the sight of them. They had grown even in captivity, though more leanly than they should. The chains had rubbed raw hollows in the scales above their ankles. Her heart twisted. She took the horn from Barristan before he could object. At once, both dragons froze. Not as a hound freezes at scent, not as a horse shies from flame. They went still with a total, terrible attention that made the chamber seem suddenly too small to contain them. Viserion's pupils narrowed to black slits. Rhaegal's head came up slowly, smoke whispering from his nostrils. Daenerys stepped forward. "Your Grace," Barristan warned. "Stay back." She carried the horn to the edge of the first ring of scorched stone. It was heavier than it looked. She could feel its warmth even through the cloth. The dragon's eyes followed it, and only it. "Do you know this?" she asked them softly in Valyrian. "Do you remember what I do not?" Rhaegal answered with a low, rolling growl. Viserion lunged. The chain snapped taut. Iron screamed. Fire burst from the dragon's mouth in a white gold fan that licked the floor a few feet from her. Missandei cried out. Barristan started forward, but Daenerys did not retreat. Viserion's head was thrust out as far as the chain allowed, jaws open, smoke spilling over sharp, pale teeth. He was not striking at her. He was striking for the horn. She pulled the cloth back. The black surface drank the torchlight. Rhaegal slammed both foreclaws into the floor. Sparks jumped. For one instant, Daenerys thought the great iron ring itself would rip free from the stone. She saw the old horror in their eyes. Not simple rage, not hunger. Recognition. Her grip shifted. The edge of one metal band bit her palm. Pain flashed bright. A small red line opened across her skin. Before she could curse, one fat drop of blood fell onto the horn. The glyphs along the nearest band woke. There was no other word. Red seeped into the pale inlays like wine into snow, racing from sign to sign until the whole ring glimmered. Not brightly, not yet, but alive enough that Missandei gasped and Barristan swore. The horn pulsed under Daenerys' hand. Far off, beyond brick, night, bay, and city, something roared. Not from the pit, not from the chamber, from beyond Meereen's walls. Drogon. The sound was faint with distance, but she knew it. A black dragon's cry, savage and lonely, coming down through the night. Her breath caught. Viserion screamed answer. Rhaegal surged against his chain. Daenerys flung the cloth back over the horn. The red glow guttered. The pit did not go still, not at once, but the wildest edge passed. Rhaegal reared and crashed down. Viserion tore at the air. Yet the voice from beyond the city did not come again. Barristan seized her wrist and dragged her backward before she could protest. That is enough. She did not fight him. When they reached the door, Daenerys looked back once. Rhaegal's great head was lifted high now. Viserion had crouched low, wings trembling. Through the folds of scarlet silk, the hidden horn made no sound at all. But both dragons stared at it, as if at the sun. That night, after the doors were barred and the guards doubled, and the horn locked in a chest of carved cedar bound in iron, Daenerys lay awake on her bed and listened to Meereen breathe around her. The city did not know what had entered it that morning. It slept on, full of cooks and thieves, lovers, murderers, scribes, eunuchs, and children. In the chambers below hers, the scarlet cloth covered the black horn. Beyond the walls, Drogon wandered the hills and fed on charred sheep and stolen goats. Somewhere over the bay, the stars burned cold and clear. Yet she could not shake the feeling that something older than kings had opened one eye and looked toward her through the dark. She dreamed of a road made from fused black stone. It ran between smoking towers whose tops had fallen away into the clouds. The air was hot enough to sear the lungs. Rivers of dark glass shimmered where streets should have been. And everywhere there were dragons, not living but carved, their mouths stretched open in silent cries. Men and women with silver gold hair walked that road in robes the color of garnets and night. Their hands were ringed. Their eyes were proud. Slaves went before them in chains, carrying horns as black as the one in her chamber, each longer than a man's torso, each engraved with glyphs that crawled like living fire. When the first slave lifted his horn and blew, his cheeks caved inward, as if something within the metal drank him dry. Flame burst from his eyes. The sound that came forth was not music but command, raw and vast. A lash of noise that sent every dragon on every tower turning its head as one. Daenerys wanted to cry out. No voice came. Further down the road, a woman waited for her in a lacquered wooden mask. Quaithe stood by a pillar veined with red crystal, her shadow long behind her, and where the shadow touched the stones they smote. "The horn has found the blood it wanted," she said. Daenerys tried to ask what horn, what blood, what price, but the words were ash in her mouth. Quaithe lifted one gloved hand. On each finger burned a small pale flame. A dragon is no horse to be reined by leather. A dragon is no slave to be yoked by bronze. Chains of iron bruise the flesh. Chains of song bruise the soul. The road cracked open. Beneath it she saw fire, and under the fire faces, hundreds of them, mouths open in a mute red scream. "To touch the old wound is to make it bleed again," Quaithe said. "To wake the voice of Valyria is to wake its hunger. Beware the gift that makes obedience. Beware the mouth that must drink death to speak." The woman's mask split down the center. Inside was darkness and stars. Daenerys woke with her own hand clenched so hard in the sheet that her nails had torn the silk. Pre-dawn blue light lay across the chamber. A single lamp had burned itself down to a yellow bead at the wick. Missandei was at her bedside, frightened. "Your Grace, they said you cried out." Daenerys sat up. Her heart was pounding. Sweat had dampened her shift and plastered her hair to the back of her neck. For one dizzy instant, the chamber still seemed full of smoke. "It was a dream," she said. The words were thin. Missandei brought her water. Her small hand shook as she passed the cup. "The captain from the harbor asks to leave the city. He says men have begun asking what cargo he brought." "Who asks?" He did not know. Men with veils over their mouths. Men with painted cheeks. Men who paid in gold. The child hesitated. "And Skahaz asks if he should take their tongues." Daenerys drank. The water was warm but welcome. She set the cup aside. "No tongues. Not yet." She swung her feet to the floor. "Send for the council." By the time the sun had cleared the city walls, the day had become a knot of voices. Resnak arrived damp and sweet-smelling, fussing over tribute accounts and grain tallies even before he had bowed. Skahaz came in plain dark wool, his shaved skull gleaming with sweat, hard-eyed as a butcher. The Green Grace came veiled in soft green silk and perfumed calm, her old hands folded, her smile unreadable. Hisdar zo Lorak followed, elegant in cream linen embroidered with copper thread, his face as smooth and composed as carved ivory. Barristan took his place at Daenerys' right. Missandei stood with her tablets. Outside, somewhere below the chamber, a caged bird sang 3 shrill notes and fell silent. Daenerys let them speak first. It was useful sometimes to hear how men spent their fear when they believed their queen uncertain. Resnak fretted over unrest in the Eastern Market, where freedmen had fought over a salt cart and 2 had died trampled. Skahaz reported 3 murders in the night, all done by men in harpy masks. One victim an old woman who sold eels by the river stairs. The Green Grace murmured that blood called for peace, and that peace required compromise. Hisdar spoke of the Yunkish envoys waiting outside the city, their patience thinning. "All the city mutters of dragons again," he said. A shepherd's daughter claims she heard one cry from the hills. A baker says there was fire beyond the eastern gate. Fear breeds rumor. Rumor breeds folly. Millie. Gun. His gaze touched her very lightly when he said it. He knew something. Or suspected. His star missed little in Meereen. He moved through his own city like a cat through high grass, elegant, silent, and impossible to judge. And what would you have me do? Daenerys asked. Rule, he said, and bowed his head in a picture of deference. Show the city a queen of law, not wonder. Meereen has had enough of wonder. Skahaz gave a short, ugly laugh. Meereen had 400 years of chains. The city can stomach a little wonder if wonder burns the right men. Asia. Wonder burns high and low alike, Hisdar said. Daenerys wanted to say, and you would know, Lord of Old Blood. Instead, she listened as they argued over hostages, grain prices, the question of reopening the fighting pits, the temper of the Yunkish outside the walls. All the while, the dream clung to her like smoke. Under the measured cadences of Kor, she heard again the long, impossible note of a dead slave blowing into black metal. Chains of song bruised the soul. At last, the steward at the door announced Dario Naharis. He came in without waiting to be summoned, laughing, a slash of bright life across all the pale caution in the chamber. His forked beard was oil blue. His hair smelled of cloves and horse. A fresh cut marked one cheek. He wore yellow silk beneath a light mail shirt, blackened by use, and his curved blades hung easy at his hips. "My queen," he said, bowing low enough to mock the room but not her. "You look too serious for so hot a morning." "That's because I have serious men about me." Resnak made a wounded sound. Hisdar's mouth smoothed tighter. Barristan did not smile at all. Dario smiled enough for all of them. "We took 3 scouts south of the olive groves," he said. Yunkish, mounted and clumsy. One lived long enough to say they expect more sellswords from Nugias within the fortnight. His dark blue eyes lifted to hers. "If we mean to strike, strike soon." "There will be no strike this morning," Daenerys said. "As you command." He said it lightly, but his gaze slid from face to face and read the room as quick as any captain. When it found the slight strain around her eyes, it sharpened. The council dragged on until the sun had risen fully and the chamber grew stifling. By the time she dismissed them, Daenerys felt scraped hollow. Hisdar bowed over her hand longer than courtesy required. The green grace told her gently that peace had a mother's face and urged patience. Resnak fluttered away toward the counting rooms. Skahaz lingered just long enough to say, "I do not like secrets in my queen's house," before he too was gone. Only Dario remained when the door shut. He leaned one shoulder against a pillar and studied her. Something happened. Yes. He waited. Daenerys crossed to the lattice and looked down over the city. Sunlight had turned the bricks pale gold. A line of slaves, no longer slaves, carried baskets through the lower market. A pair of little girls chased one another around a cistern. On the distant eastern road, dust plumes marked riders coming and going. Meereen went on with its life, no matter what old terror slept under her roof. "There is an object in this pyramid," she said. "Something brought from the west, something the dragons know." Dario's silence behind her was total for a heartbeat. Then she heard his boots on the tiles as he came near. "A weapon? Perhaps? Then why do you look as if it might bite you?" She turned. "Perhaps because it might." His eyes shone with interest, not fear. Dario liked knives, poisons, traps, cunning and quick death. The world had taught him too well that every useful thing was dangerous. "Show me." "No?" A grin touched his mouth. "Then tell me what frightens old white cloaks and perfumed lords." "It came from Valyria," she said. That wiped the grin away for a moment. Not because Dario was a superstitious fool, but because even mercenaries had heard tales of the smoking sea. And when I touched it, my dragons answered. His interest returned twofold, now dark and bright together. "Ah, you say that as if it were simple." He shrugged one silk-clad shoulder. Everything is simple. Men make it tangled because they are afraid to choose. If an old magic thing calls dragons, use it to call dragons. If it belongs to your enemies, hide it or break it. If it kills those who touch it, have your enemies touch it first. Daenerys almost laughed. A very sellsword answer. The best kind. A king's answer is longer, and usually more foolish. She should have sent him away. Instead, she said, "What if using it makes me more what my enemies fear than what my people need?" Dario's expression changed. Not softer. He was not a soft man, but something in him leaned nearer. Your people need to live. Your enemies need to fear. Those are not two roads, my queen. They are one. It was the sort of certainty that could intoxicate. Viserys had loved certainties. So had men who nailed children to mileposts and called it order. Daenerys thought of Quaithe's faceless warning, of red glyphs waking under her blood. "Leave me," she said. Dario searched her face one moment longer, then bowed. "As you wish. But if the old ghosts of Valyria have brought you a sword, do not bury it because pious men prefer you unarmed." After he was gone, Daenerys stood alone in the bright chamber and listened to his words echo where Quaithe's had echoed before. Between them lay the horn like a bridge cast over a pit. By noon, she had decided one thing, if nothing else. She would learn what price the bridge demanded before she set a foot upon it. The captain's tale grew uglier with every telling. Daenerys had Kavo brought before her again in a smaller chamber, one with bare brick walls and no windows, where hot air sat unmoving like a beast too lazy to strike. Only Barristan, Missandei, and two unsullied attended. The horn lay wrapped beside her on a bench. This time the captain's fear had ripened into a kind of desperate reverence. Men often mistook terror for holiness. She had learned that in Qarth, in the Red Waste, in the flames around Drogo's pyre, they saw what they could not master and wanted either to worship it or to kill it. "Tell me of the shrine," she said. Kavo wet his lips. "I never saw it, your grace. The Volantines told of it while they died." "Then tell me their words." He obeyed. The galley had come from Volantis with 20 oars and a cargo of chain, bronze tools, and wine. They had sailed west with 2 other ships under the command of a rich tiger officer who believed there was plunder to be taken from the fringes of Old Valyria. Not the deep smoking sea, he swore. Not the very heart of the curse. Only a broken island shrine where waves had torn away half the earth and left chambers open to the air. The Volantines found black stone columns split by roots of fire. They found a long hall under a cliff where the walls were carved with dragons coiled around hornblowers. They found a chamber full of skulls fused to the floor, and on an altar of oily black stone they found the horn. The officer wanted gold, Kavo said. There was none. Only that. One of his men said the glyphs named it a treasure of the Freehold. Another said the dead in the floor had been sacrifices. They argued. Then one laughed and said if it was a dragonhorn, Volantis could bind dragons and become an empire again. No. Kavo glanced toward the wrapped shape at her side and made the sign against evil. 3 men carried it to the galley. Before dawn, one had gone blind. By sunset, another was coughing pieces of himself. The officer ordered one of his slaves to sound it. His voice dropped to a whisper. They said the slave's chest went black from within. He died with smoke pouring from his mouth. Barristan's face darkened. Missandei hugged her arms around herself. "And the horn?" Daenerys asked. The men who heard it fell to their knees, bleeding from nose and ears. Then the sea around the galley boiled. He looked at her with naked misery. They thought dragons were coming. None came. Their ship burned anyway. Daenerys sat back. There were parts of the tale she did not trust. Dying men embroidered. Sailors lied. Fear put claws and teeth upon ordinary misfortune. Yet other parts rang true enough to trouble her. The response of her dragons had not been a sailor's lie. The red waking of the glyphs beneath her blood had not been fear. "Why bring such a thing to me at all?" she asked. Kavo stared. "Where else could it go?" He spoke with such plain honesty that she had no answer ready. After she dismissed him, Barristan remained where he was, hands clasped behind him. "Burn it," he said. She almost smiled. Would that work? If it is sorcery, then fire may answer fire, or make it stronger. Then sink it in the deepest water you can find, and let some fishermen draw it up in 100 years? Barristan's jaw worked. He was angry now, but not with her. With helplessness, perhaps. With old ghosts. "Your Grace, I served a king who thought every hidden flame was his by right. Men died for his fancies. A whole castle died at Summerhall trying to wake dragons from stone. Prince Duncan, the king's friends, perhaps your own grandsire as well. Old powers ask old prices." The name hit her. Summerhall had always been half-story to her, a place of grief and smoke spoken of in lowered tones. "You were there?" "No, but I saw what its memory did to those who lived." He hesitated. "And I saw Ares after." He wanted fire to love him. "Fire does not love. It only consumes." "Nay." Daenerys looked down at the wrapped horn. "You think this is madness. I think it is temptation." The word fell between them like a coin in a well. Later that day, she rode through the eastern gate under a white awning to visit the sick camps, because queens did not have the luxury of only one terror at a time. The pale mare had entered the city's breath despite all barriers. Dysentery and fever gnawed at the refugee pens outside the walls where the Yunkish had driven thousands before them. Flies swarmed so thick that they darkened the air. Children sat in the dust with knees like knotted sticks. A woman too weak to stand held out both arms and cried, "Missa," as Daenerys passed. Though there was not enough strength in her to weep, the smell was so foul that the perfumed cloth over Daenerys' mouth did almost nothing. Missandei rode near, silent and wide-eyed. Grey Worm kept the unsullied ring unbroken, their spears bright against all the dirt and misery. Men with sunken cheeks bowed. Some reached for her skirts. Others only stared. A queen, she thought bitterly, can promise justice to a clean hall. Justice rots in the sun outside the walls. A healer showed her a boy who had lived 3 days without water. Another showed her a mother who had lost 2 babies before sunset. Daenerys listened, promised food, promised fresh cisterns, promised more carts for the dead. Promises were cheap against the scale of the need. She knew that. So did they. Yet they looked at her as if promises were all the difference between dawn and the dark. On the ride back to the pyramid, she said nothing. When she reached her chambers, the horn was waiting where she had left it, untouched, patient. It seemed obscene that Old Valyria could offer her a way to summon dragons in the very hour when children died for want of clean water. Obscene, and cruelly apt. The Dragonlords had built empires while lesser folk died nameless beneath them. Would using the horn make her more fit to save the weak, or only more like those who had never seen the weak at all? She carried the thing onto her lap that evening while the last light bled out of the west. Wrapped, it still felt warm through silk. The weight of it settled across her thighs like a judgment. Hisdar was announced soon after. He entered with polished courtesy, bowed, and stopped when he saw her holding the wrapped object. If it surprised him, he hid it well. He spoke instead of the peace proposals, of hostages, of the reopening of the fighting pits, of the old noble houses and what signs might reassure them. His words were smooth and careful and full of Meereen's old understanding. Pride soothed, custom honored, bloodshed delayed by ceremony. "And if I refuse?" she asked. He lifted his hands slightly. "Then the city remains a drawn bow. Every hour the string grows tighter." "Nani? Ah. Would marriage loosen it?" "It would show the old blood that you mean to reign in Meereen. Not only over it." "Not only over it." The phrase pricked. Daenerys looked at the cloth across her lap and thought of silver-haired lords on a fused black road, ruling over a world they had learned to treat as spoil. "And what sign," she asked softly, "would show them I mean never to be ruled?" Hisdar's gaze held hers for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face then made him cautious. Power shown too suddenly breeds panic, not loyalty. There was wisdom in that. There was fear in it as well. After he left, Missandei came to braid Daenerys' hair for sleep. The child's fingers were deft and cool. "Will you sound it?" she asked in a small voice. Daenerys looked at their reflections in the polished bronze mirror. "No, Dae." Missandei's hands slowed. "But you wish to?" "Yes." The child lowered her eyes. "In Ath, the old people say a cruel thing and a needed thing are often twins. They may look alike in the dark." Daenerys reached back and touched her wrist. "And in the light?" Missandei thought. "In the light, one asks for more." That night, Daenerys sent for Skahaz. When the Shavapate came, she gave him a simple command. "Bring me a man condemned to die," she said. "One with blood enough on his hands that the city will not mourn him." Skahaz smiled the thin smile of a man being given work suited to his nature. A son of the Harpy, or a great master who paid them, or both in one skin if you can find him. "And what is to be done with this fortunate man?" Daenerys looked at the cedar chest where the horn lay locked under iron bands. "I mean," she said, "to learn whether Valyria still asks the same price." Skahaz found her 3. One was a sellsword taken outside the western wall with a purse of Yunkish coin and a harpy mask hidden in his saddlebag. One was a freedman who had turned informer for the old masters and led 2 boys into an alley where their throats were cut. The third was a great master named Grazdan Mo Ulhor, narrow-faced and perfumed even in chains, who had been accused by 7 different witnesses of paying for murders and buying poison by the jar. Each denied. Each swore innocence. Each blamed another. Daenerys believed all 3 guilty in one way or another. Meereen made guilt grow like mold in warm, dark places. She did not choose at once. Instead, she went into the city by torchlight. Grey Worm led 20 unsullied before her, their points steady. Missandei rode on a small gray mare with a hood over her hair. The streets of Meereen at night were not the same city she ruled by day. In darkness, the brick walls sweated heat and held old whispers. Lanes narrowed. Shadows deepened under stairs and balconies. Oil lamps smoked behind lattice screens. Somewhere a flute played a melancholy tune. Somewhere sandals slapped in flight. Somewhere, unseen, the sons of old keys sharpened their knives and waited. They found the latest killings near a dyer's yard close by the river. 2 men had died there, both freed brickmakers, each still wearing the leather aprons of his trade. One had been gutted. The other's face had been cut beyond knowing. Harpy masks lay abandoned in the lane like sneering moon faces. Blood ran dark between the cobbles and gathered around a dropped lantern. The oil from it had spread in a shining black fan. Daenerys dismounted without waiting for Grey Worm's caution. Heat clung to the alley walls. The dead men's blood smelled of iron and sour wine. A woman crouched nearby with her hands over her mouth. She had been weeping so hard she had no tears left. When she saw Daenerys, she dragged herself through the dirt and tried to press her forehead to the queen's sandals. "Misa," she whispered. "Misa, he only made bricks." Daenerys knelt and took the woman's shoulders. They were as light as kindling. "What did you see?" "Masks." The woman's eyes were raw and swollen. 4, maybe 5. They came from nowhere. They said the city remembers its masters. My husband ran to help and then..." She choked. "Then?" Daenerys held her until the trembling lessened. Grey Worm had the alley sealed. Skahaz's men were already sniffing through the darkness like lean dogs, eager for vengeance. None of it would put breath back into the butchered men. When at last she rose, her knees streaked with dust and blood, she saw a little girl peering from a doorway across the alley. The child could not have been more than 6. Her eyes were huge in the torchlight. She looked not at the corpses but at Daenerys, as if searching her face for proof that queens could mend what knives had done. There was none to give. Back in the pyramid, Daenerys could not wash the smell of the alley from her skin. She had scented water brought, then hotter water, then perfumed oil. The blood remained in memory if not in flesh. She went to the cedar chest before sleeping and rested both hands on the lid. A cruel thing and a needed thing are often twins. If she used the horn to call Drogon to Meereen, if she showed the city that the mother of dragons could summon fire from the sky itself, would the sons of the Harpies still dare their knives? Would the Yunkish still sit laughing outside her walls? Would children in the plague camps live longer because fear had silenced richer men? Or would fear only teach them to sharpen greater knives? Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it was thin and torn by sounds from below. Not roars this time, but restless thumps, the scrape of chain on stone, the uneasy shifting of creatures who dreamed bad dreams. Before dawn, Grey Worm returned to say the Great Master had named names under questioning. Some were false, no doubt. Some might be true. In Meereen, truth was a fish forever slipping through bloody fingers. Daenerys listened, dismissed him, and sat watching the dark weaken beyond her shutters. When the sun rose, she sent for the condemned men. Grasdan Mo Ulhor came washed and oiled despite his irons, his nails trimmed, his face held in that strained dignity the old blood prized more than life. The informer came shaken. The sellsword came sullen and red-eyed. Skahaz would have liked the queen to flay all three and hang their skins from the gate. Resnak urged a public beheading with heralds. Barristan argued for swift deaths and no spectacle. Dario laughed at all of them and said fear worked best when dressed richly. Daenerys sat above them in the hall of audience with the horn wrapped in black cloth across the arms of her chair. None of the three prisoners could take his eyes off it. That told her more than their pleas. They knew enough of danger to smell it even blind. "What do you know of this?" she asked. The informer dropped his gaze and babbled that he knew nothing. Nothing. Mercy? Mercy. The sellsword spat and said it was a devil's flute. Only Grasdan answered after a long pause. Old songs say the Dragonlords of Valyria spoke with bronze mouths when they wished beasts to kneel. Old songs in Meereen speak of many things, Daenerys said. How should you know any Valyrian song? His perfumed nostrils flared. My mother's mother kept books. Books forbidden to slaves? His silence admitted more than speech might have. Daenerys descended from her chair one step, then another. Did you pay for murder in my city? No. Did you buy poison? No. Did you arm men in harpy masks? I am a lord of Meereen, he said stiffly. I armed household guards as any lord must. Did they wear harpy masks when they murdered brickmakers in alleys? He licked his lips. Your Grace, Meereen is full of violence you did not make and cannot unmake. Men are cut down in the dark because order has been broken. Kill me and you do not mend that. Spare me and I may yet be useful. There was a kind of courage in the answer. Or arrogance. Often they wore the same face. Daenerys looked at the black-wrapped weight upon her chair arms, and then back at him. You will be useful, she said. He did not understand at first. Then he saw something in Skahaz's expression, or in Barristan's grim stillness, and whatever proud words he had prepared broke. That evening, when the sun had gone down, and the pyramid's shadows stretched long and blue, Daenerys ordered the lower hall below the dragon pit made ready. Not the pit itself yet. Another chamber first. One with thick walls and a high narrow vent cut into the western face. Grey Worm posted unsullied at every door. Barristan inspected each hinge himself. Missandei came though Daenerys wished to leave her above. The child refused with tear-bright stubbornness. You should not see this, Daenerys told her. Missandei squared her small shoulders. If you must see it, why not I? There was no good answer. They brought Grasdan chained hand and foot. He tried pride once more, saying that the old blood of Meereen would curse the queen for this. Daenerys almost answered that the old blood had cursed itself 1,000 times over already. Instead, she told Grey Worm to bind him to the stone post at the chamber's center. The black cloth was taken from the horn. Grasdan's face went gray. You know it then, Daenerys said. Not by sight. he whispered. "By tale." "What tale?" He made a sound that might have been laughter if fear had not thinned it. "That it is death for the mouth, dominion for the hand, and doom for all who stand too near." Barristan stepped forward. "Your Grace, this has gone far enough." "Has it?" she thought. "Or not far enough?" She wanted certainty and hated herself for it. She wanted one clean answer from the world after years of mud and blood and betrayal. Was that not the oldest weakness of rulers? To prefer a terrible certainty over a human doubt? "Tomorrow," she said at last, though every face in the chamber had expected tonight. "At first dark. Not here. In the pit." Grasden sagged in his chains. Barristan closed his eyes briefly as if in prayer. Missandei let out a breath she had been holding so long it shivered. Daenerys lifted the horn herself and felt its mute warmth. "Tomorrow," she repeated. Then she carried it from the chamber, and as she passed through the corridor beyond, the stone underfoot gave a faint, answering tremor, as if far below, in the old dark heart of the pyramid, her changed children had heard the promise. The dragon pit smelled of hot iron, blood, and rainless storm. By first dark, every torch in the lower vaults had been lit. Their flames leaned and snapped in the heavy air, throwing hard shadows across the blackened arches. Daenerys stood at the edge of the scorched ring with Barristan on one side and Daario on the other, Grey Worm and a wall of Unsullied behind. Missandei stood farther back despite her protests, white-faced but unyielding. Skahaz waited near the entrance with his shaved head shining like a skull. Resnak had not come. He had pleaded sickness, and Daenerys had let him. At the center of the pit, Grasdan Amo Olhor was tied to a post thick enough to anchor an elephant. His fine cream robe had been replaced with a rough tunic. Sweat ran down his neck in shining lines. He stared at the horn where it rested on a stone block in front of him and breathed too fast. All around them, the pit breathed dragon. Viserion prowled the limit of his chain, pale scales flashing like old gold whenever the torchlight struck true. Rhaegal had reared half upright against the far wall, claws digging furrows in the scorched stone. Both dragons had sensed the thing from the moment the bronze doors opened. Their eyes never left it. Smoke drifted in curls from their nostrils. The iron links at their throats and legs creaked under constant strain. Daenerys had not worn a crown. She had dressed in black, the color that made the silver of her hair seem colder. Her hands were bare. A thin white scar crossed one palm where the horn had bitten her the night before. She could still feel that little wake of pain. "You may speak," she told Grasdan. He licked cracked lips. "There is no law in this. Not in Old Valyria either, I think." His laugh came out broken. "That is meant to comfort me?" "No, it is meant to remind me." Barristan turned his head sharply at that, but said nothing. Daario watched everything with bright predatory interest. He had wanted the test more than any of them except perhaps Skahaz, though for different reasons. To the Shavapate, the death of a great master was always a kind of prayer. To Daario, danger was simply another wine. He looked at the dragons as other men looked at dancers. Daenerys stepped closer to the horn. "Missandei, read the line again." "Nah." The child's voice was very small in that cavernous dark. "Blood for fire, fire for blood. No mortal breath may wake the binding voice and live." She swallowed. "The rest is broken. Master, dragon, and obedience. Those words remain." "Good." Grey Worm brought a leather thong and knotted it through the horns carrying loops, so Grasdan might hold it without dropping it. The great master struggled then in earnest, all dignity gone. "Mercy," he gasped. "Your Grace, mercy. Let me die another way." Daenerys studied him. "Did you show mercy to those your coin bought?" His mouth opened and closed. She thought of the little girl in the alley, watching her as if queens could reverse a knife stroke by decree. She thought of the plague camps, of harpy masks, of Quaithe on the Black Road, saying, "Beware the mouth that must drink death to speak." "Lift it," Daenerys said. The Unsullied cut the ropes from Grasden's wrists and left the rest of him bound. Shaking, he took the leather thong in both hands. The horn sagged under its own weight. He was not a strong man. Its black length looked grotesque in his grasp. Too large, too dark, too alive. "Please," Missandei whispered. Though whether to Daenerys or to whatever gods still listened in Meereen, even she might not have known. Barristan said, "I beg you, your grace." Daenerys did not answer. Her heartbeat thudded in her throat. She could feel the dragon's attention like heat on her skin. Grasden lifted the horn. The movement changed the pit. That was all. No note yet. No magic. Yet, every flame along the walls thinned blue for an instant. Viserion screamed and threw himself forward. Rhaegal struck the stone with his tail so hard dust rained from the arch above. "Blow," said Daenerys. Grasden pressed the pale lip to his mouth. He tried once and no sound came. Only a wet, choking gasp. Dario smiled with half his mouth. Harder. The second attempt birthed the note. It was not loud at first. That was the worst of it. A low iron moan that seemed to come through the stone, the chains, the bones of everyone in the chamber. It went through Daenerys like a blade of frozen fire. The hair at the nape of her neck stood up. Missandei cried out and clapped both hands over her ears. One of the torches near the entrance guttered dead. Then the note swelled. Grasden's back arched. The veins in his neck stood out black and thick. Smoke leaked from the corners of his mouth. The sound became vast, impossible. A command given to the world in a language older than mercy. The red bands along the horn flared like molten metal. Glyphs sprang alive over the whole black length of it, racing in fiery loops and lines. Viserion hurled himself against his chain with such force that the floor shook. Rhaegal beat his wings once, twice, and half the ash in the pit leapt whirling upward. The iron ring that held him screamed in protest. Grasden's eyes burst. Not fully, not with the grotesque wetness of slaughter, but in a red seep that ran down his cheeks as the note tore through him. His mouth blackened around the lip of the horn. The skin there split. Smoke poured from the cracks. Barristan surged forward. "Enough." Daenerys seized his arm. She did not know why. Because she needed one heartbeat more. Because the world had opened and she could not look away. Because somewhere inside the impossible note there was another sound. A pull, a reaching. Beyond the city walls, far off and yet all too near, a roar answered. Drogon. No one mistook it this time. The black dragon's cry rolled over Meereen like thunder. The slaves in the lower yard screamed. Horses stamped and panicked above. In the pit, every torch bent inward toward the horn as if drawn by wind. No one else could feel. Grasden was burning from within. Daenerys saw it in the glow beneath his skin, red leaking through the veins of his throat and face. The note climbed higher. Rhaegal gave one savage wrench and a link near his left foreleg snapped with a sound like a sword breaking. Viserion blasted the air with white gold flame. The stone post beside Grasden smoked. And then Daenerys felt it. Not in her ears, in her blood. A line, hot and sudden, as if the drop that had touched the horn had never dried but stretched instead like a thread from her scarred palm into the metal, and from the metal outward through dark sky and dust and distance, seeking black wings. She saw Drogon in her mind for one instant. Not as memory, but as if through another set of eyes. Hillside scrub crushed under talons, a goat's half-gnawed spine, red-black scales lifting with breath, a great head snapping toward the city. The shock of it almost drove her to her knees. "Daenerys!" Barristan shouted. She moved then. 2 strides took her to Grasden. His hands had clenched dead around the horn's leather thong. The flesh of his lips was gone. His breath was all smoke. Daenerys grabbed the horn itself despite the heat and wrenched. Pain slammed into her palm. The metal seared like a brand. She bit back a scream and tore it free. The note broke. Not ended. Broke. It snapped across the pit like a cable parting, and for one dreadful instant the silence after was louder than sound. Grasden collapsed against his bonds. Smoke rose from his mouth and nostrils. The smell of cooked meat filled the chamber. Viserion thrashed so hard that one chain anchor tore a fist-sized chunk from the floor. Rhaegal lunged with broken link dragging. Dario swore, drew both Arex, and planted himself before Missandei. Grey Worm barked orders. Unsullied spears lowered as if bronze points could matter in such a moment. "Back!" Daenerys cried in Valyrian, not to her men but to the dragons. "Back! Kirlaitsos." Whether they understood the word or only her voice, she could not say. Viserion's flame guttered. Rhaegal's head swung toward her. Both dragons were half mad, eyes rolling molten bright. But the unbroken note was gone, and with it some part of the frenzy. Their wings beat once, twice. Ash stormed through the chamber. Then the worst of it began to ebb. No one moved until Viserion settled to a crouch and Rhaegal dragged his broken chain in a slow circle, glaring. Dario lowered one blade. Barristan was white to the lips. Missandei still had her hands over her ears and tears streaming down her face. Grey Worm's spear arm did not tremble at all. In the center of the pit, the great master hung dead in his bonds, his mouth a black ruin. Daenerys looked down at the horn in her own hands. Its red bands glowed dimly still. Her blood from the old cut and blood from her fresh burn had smeared together over the glyphs. The metal smelled of smoke and salt and something deeper, sweeter, fouler. A man's breath stolen and turned to cinders. "It calls him," she said, though she had not meant to speak aloud. Barristan stared at her. What? Drogon. It called him. Then destroy it. Dario laughed softly, breathless with something perilously close to awe. Destroy it? 7 hells, old man. She just dragged a dragon from the sky with a slaver's dying breath. Not from the sky, Daenerys said. She felt the hot thread still, thinner now. Fading, yet it remained. From the world, she whispered. Somewhere outside, over the roofs and alleys and markets of Meereen, Drogon roared again. This time the city answered with screams. Word ran through the pyramid faster than blood. By the time Daenerys reached the upper chambers, breath still raw in her lungs from smoke and terror, the servants already knew something monstrous had happened below. She saw it in their faces as they knelt aside from her path. The avid fright, the bright disbelief, the hunger for miracle. They had heard the second roar from beyond the walls. Some had heard the first note of the horn through stone and distance, and did not know what their ears had named. Men make stories in the span of a heartbeat. By midnight, the story would have 100 tongues, and not one truthful. Barristan wanted the horn locked in the strongest vault the pyramid possessed, under triple guard, with the key at his belt. Skahaz urged that every lord in Meereen be hauled from bed and questioned until dawn. Dario urged immediate attack on the Yunkish lines while fear still ran before the Black Dragon's cry. Grey Worm said only that his men would obey. Missandei sat silent near the window with a cup untasted in her hands. Daenerys heard them all and listened to none. Her burned palm had been salved with a green paste that stung worse than fire. Yet the hurt seemed distant beside the memory of the thread in her blood. She could still almost feel it, stretched now into nothing, but real enough that her skin prickled when she turned east. How far had Drogon come? How close? Was he circling the hills beyond the city, maddened? Was he already flying toward Meereen? The horn had not brought him meek and bridled. It had lashed him. That much she knew now. Whatever bond lay in the Old Valyrian sorcery, it was made through pain. A dragon chained by agony, she thought, is only another sort of slave. The idea sickened her, and yet a darker voice under it whispered, a slave that answers. She hated that voice most because it sounded like reason. Near midnight, when the heat of the day had at last thinned from suffocating to merely oppressive, Daenerys, ordered the horn moved from the temporary vault below her chamber to the old audience room beside the Queen's stair, where she could watch over it herself. Barristan protested until his voice roughened. She overruled him. There were times she needed the old knight's caution like shield mail. There were times she needed him to remember she wore the crown. So the horn came up wrapped in black cloth, borne by 4 Unsullied and Grey Worm himself, while Barristan walked ahead and Daenerys followed with Missandei close beside. The halls were lit only by wall lamps. Most of the court slept or pretended to. Through open screens, the city breathed in darkness. They had nearly reached the Queen's stair when the first lamp went out. No one touched it. The flames simply guttered, spat, and vanished, as if pinched by invisible fingers. Grey Worm halted at once. Barristan's sword flashed bright out of the sheath. Back, the old knight snapped. The second lamp died. The third did not die. It burst. Hot oil splashed across the wall and floor in a spray of fire. One Unsullied cried out. From both shadowed side passages, men in harpy masks rushed with curved knives. The first assassin never reached them. Barristan cut him down with a single stroke that opened throat to spine. Grey Worm took the next in the belly and drove the spear point through until it rang on brick. The corridor became steel and shouting in half a heartbeat. "Protect the Queen!" Grey Worm barked. They tried. A masked man crashed into the third bearer of the horn and sent both sprawling. The black cloth slipped. Red metal flashed. Another assassin came low with a hooked blade meant for Daenerys' legs. Missandei screamed. Daenerys snatched a lampstand from the wall and drove the bronze cup into the man's masked face. He reeled. Dario, arriving from somewhere deeper in the pyramid with impossible timing and both Arrax naked in his hands, took the man's head as neat as a cook shucking fruit. "Could you not wait for morning murders?" he said, breathless and grinning like a madman. There were 7 attackers, maybe 9. In the narrow stair, they seemed more. One wore a silk sleeve of noble quality beneath his black outer robe. Another smelled of the fish market. One might have been a palace servant from the swiftness with which he knew the turns. Harpy masks made all men equal in ugliness. Grey Worm took a slash along the ribs and did not so much as grunt. Barristan fought as if age were a lie invented for lesser men. His white cloak darkened in streaks where other blood found it. Dario moved like music gone wrong, all glitter and mockery and sudden red endings. Daenerys bent, snatched up the fallen horn and nearly dropped it. Even wrapped, it pulsed. The stone under her sandals gave a little shudder. A masked man saw what she carried and changed direction at once. He came for the horn with both hands empty, as if he dared not risk scratching it with steel. His haste told her more than any confession. Someone had sent them for this, not merely for her life. She pivoted away. The black cloth slipped farther. A line of glowing glyph winked through. The assassin lunged. Without thinking, Daenerys thrust the half-unwrapped horn forward like a staff. It struck his chest. No blade, no note, only a glancing blow. Yet the moment metal touched him, the man convulsed. His mask cracked against the wall. A strangled cry tore out of him, and for one instant every remaining lamp in the corridor flared high, long blue tongues lifting from their cups. Then he fell twitching, smoke rising from the fabric over his breastbone. Everything stopped for the span of a single breath. The surviving assassins saw it. So did the Unsullied. So did Barristan. Fear moved through them all in different forms. The attackers broke first. One bolted back down the side passage. Dario's Arrack took him under the shoulder. Another slipped on the oil-slick floor, and Grey Worm's spear found his throat. Silence came like a blow after the fight. The corridor stank of hot oil, blood, and something stranger, the same sweet char she had smelled in the pit. Missandei was clutching the wall so hard her knuckles had gone pale. "Did you sound it?" "No." Barristan turned on the dead man smoking at the chest and then on the horn in Daenerys' grip. Horror sat naked in his face now. "It does not need sounding to kill. Or perhaps, Daenerys thought, it had only tasted blood and answered. She had felt the pulse through the cloth, the eager little throb. Grey Worm knelt by a dying attacker, tore away the harpy mask, and revealed the lean face of a kitchen servant Daenerys remembered seeing with fruit trays. The man's tongue had been cut out long ago. Useful for secrets, she supposed. Not for answers. Skahaz arrived moments later with more brazen beasts, furious to have missed the fight and hungrier still for the aftermath. Not the cells, Barristan said as the surviving assassin was dragged upright. Question him elsewhere. There may be more within the guard. Skahaz nodded. His smile promised ugliness. Daenerys looked at the smoking corpse, and the tongueless servant, and the blood crawling between the tiles. She had thought the horn a temptation when still hidden. Now it had become a summons to everyone with ambition enough to dare. Great masters, sellswords, priests, thieves, captains, assassins, all would want it, if only to deny it to her. She ought to have been afraid. Instead, she felt tired to the marrow, and angry. Enough, she said. All heads turned. She lifted the horn higher. Black cloth slid from the bell and pooled at her feet. The red bands glowed faint as banked coals. This thing has killed one man by breath and another by touch. It called Drogon from the wild. Men are already murdering in my halls to steal it. You all tell me to hide it, sink it, bury it, burn it. And while we hide, the city chokes. My enemies sharpen knives, and every whisper in Meereen grows more dangerous. Men? And few. Barristan wiped his blade on a dead man's robe. Then all the more reason to destroy it. If it can be destroyed, everything made can be unmade. Her gaze went to the horn's banded length. Old Valyria had made things that outlived kingdoms. Dragonbone, Valyrian steel, black-fused roads no mortal hammer could mar. Some things endured because blood and fire had paid for them too dearly to fade. Dario leaned one shoulder to the wall, smiling less now. "What are you thinking, my queen?" She knew what the answer ought to be. Instead, she heard herself say, "If the city must believe I command dragons, let it believe so by truth, not rumor." Missandei stared at her. "You will sound it again." "No." Daenerys looked down at Grey Worm's wound, at Barristan's blood-striped cloak, at the dead servant with a lost tongue. "But I will call the dragon once more." This time, no one spoke at all. The decision settled over them like a drawn blade. In the silence beyond the broken lamps and the smell of murder, Meereen seemed to lean closer, listening. The storm came in from the bay just before dawn. Not rain. Meereen was too dry and too mean for rain that day. But wind, heat lightning, and a ceiling of bruised cloud that turned the city below into a world of copper and shadow. Banners snapped against the terraces of the Great Pyramid. Dust swirled up from the lower streets and rode the air in hard little spirals. The bronze harpy on the highest mast seemed to writhe against the dark. Daenerys stood beneath it in a black riding dress with her hair unbound. Barristan had begged her to remain inside. Grey Worm had argued for more men. Dario had asked whether if the dragon came angry, she meant to throw the old knight at it first. She had ignored them all. The horn rested upright in an iron stand at the center of the terrace. Chains had been looped around the stand and staked into drilled holes in the stone, though Daenerys doubted iron could hold what Old Valyria had wrought if the thing chose to wake in earnest. Around it, the Unsullied formed a ring. Barristan stood just outside that ring with his sword bared. Grey Worm, bandaged but unbent, held the prisoner. This one had worn a harpy mask in her halls the night before. Under the mask, he proved to be a narrow-cheeked nobleman of no more than 20, his beard scarcely filled in, his hands soft, except for the callus where a knife hilt had rested. He had 2 fingers missing from one hand, likely payment for some earlier crime or debt. Under Skahaz's questioning, he had named 3 men and denied 4 more. He might have lied. He might not. By dusk, he had begged for a quick death. Daenerys had granted him a use instead. The wind pulled at the prisoner's ragged tunic as Grey Worm forced him to his knees before the stand. Below, Meereen was waking. People had gathered in the broad plazas and on the lesser roofs despite every order barring them. Daenerys could see them as clusters of pale faces turned upward. Word had run in the night. The Dragon Queen would show her power at dawn. Some had come in hope, some in terror, some because even fear may be irresistible when it promises spectacle. Beyond the eastern walls, faint through dust and heat, lay the Yunkish camps with their pavilions and cookfires and horse lines. If Drogon came, they too would see. Daenerys moved to the stand. The horn was already warm. That seemed impossible in the wind before sunrise. Yet her burned hand felt the truth of it through the linen binding. She had wrapped leather around the pale lips so the prisoner's mouth would not touch bare metal. Whether that would spare him anything, she did not know. She no longer lied to herself that the old device worked by mercy. Missandei came to her side unexpectedly, cheeks pale in the storm light. "Let me stand with you." "No, I will not leave you." Daenerys wanted to tell her not to be foolish, not to be brave when bravery was only another face of love. Instead, she took the child's hand once and pressed it. Missandei stepped back 2 paces and remained. Barristan came close enough that only she could hear him over the wind. This is the point at which kings become legends, and legends become monsters. Daenerys looked at the city below. "Then pray I stop at the first." She cut her palm. It was a small cut, cleaner than the horn's burn had left, drawn with one of Dario's dagger points. Blood welled bright and sharp. She laid that blood along the nearest band. The glyphs woke at once. A line of red traveled around the horn, then another. Ancient signs flared under her hand like embers stirred from ash. The prisoner on his knees made a thin, desperate noise. Missandei whispered something in Nethi too low to hear. Barristan's grip tightened on his sword. Grey Worm shoved the nobleman's shoulders forward. "Blow," Daenerys said. The prisoner shook his head violently. "Mercy. I gave you mercy when I did not hand you to Skahaz." Her voice did not shake. "Blow." Grey Worm jammed the leather-wrapped mouth to the man's lips. The first note cracked the morning. Everything happened at once. The sound burst out far louder than in the pit, sharpened by open sky and rushing wind until it seemed the city itself cried through a bronze mouth. Men below dropped to their knees. Horses screamed. The storm clouds above shuddered as if struck. The red metal bands burned white-hot. The prisoner's body bowed like a bent reed. Smoke jetted from beneath the leather wrap. His feet hammered the terrace stone. Grey Worm released him and leapt back as the note climbed higher, higher still. No longer one sound, but a lash of many braided command and anguish and hunger. Rhaegal and Viserion answered from below the pyramid with such violence that stone dust streamed from the terrace cracks. A chain broke somewhere underfoot with a boom like thunder. And from the hills east of Meereen, black against the bruise of morning, Drogon came. At first, he was only a shape bigger than the storm. Then wings. Then scales catching lightning in red slicks. Then eyes like furnace mouths. He was coming too fast. Head low, tail whipping, each downstroke of those vast black-red wings beating the air into blows. He did not descend as a hawk descends to glove. He fell toward the city like vengeance. The crowd below screamed and scattered. In the Yunkish camp's horses broke their lines. A bright pavilion collapsed. Drogon's shadow swept over walls and towers alike. The prisoner's mouth was gone. It had blackened and split away around the leather wrap. The note still tore from the horn, but now the sound seemed to come through his whole burning chest. Daenerys saw the skin there glow red between the ribs. "Take it from him," Barristan shouted. "Not yet," she thought with a sickness all its own. "Not yet. I must see whether he comes to it or to me." Drogon folded his wings and dropped. The terrace erupted into wind and dust. Unsullied lock shields by instinct more than hope. Missandei fell to one knee. Barristan planted himself before Daenerys. Dario laughed once, sharp as broken glass, and lifted both blades as if this were the finest duel of his life. Drogon hit the terrace stones 3 yards beyond the horn. The impact cracked tiles and snapped one of the iron stakes clean off. He was bigger than when she had last seen him, near enough to touch, leaner than he should have been, harder in every line. Black scales edged in blood red along neck and belly, smoke leaking from the seams of his jaw. The smell of him was hot iron, ash, and charred sheep. Lightning flashed overhead and made a red mirror of his wings. He did not look at Daenerys first. He looked at the horn. The sound from it shivered, changed, became sharper, crueler, almost eager. Drogon's lips peeled back from his black teeth. He made a noise Daenerys had never heard from him before. Not a roar, not a hiss, but something wounded and furious at once. Then, he lunged. Barristan moved in the same instant, arm thrust wide across Daenerys, but the dragon was not striking for her. One black talon swept out and shredded the prisoner from shoulder to hip before the dying man could even fall. The note ended in a wet red spray. Drogon's jaws snapped shut on empty air above the iron stand. The horn toppled. Daenerys ran. Someone shouted her name. Someone grabbed for her sleeve and missed. She reached the fallen black curve just as Drogon's great head came down over it. Heat blasted her face. One red eye fixed on her, slit pupil narrow as a knife. She could have reached for the horn. She did not. Instead, she stood empty-handed before him, wind dragging her hair wild around her shoulders, and said the only word that mattered. Drogon, he hissed. The terrace under them was chaos. Unsullied shouting. Men below running in the streets. Barristan cursing. Daria wheeling to face the great black wings if they came again. Yet between Daenerys and the dragon there was only heat, breath, and the memory of a pyre. Drogon, she said again. Softer now, as she had once said it over blood and stars in the first wet moments of new life. The dragon's nostrils widened. Smoke curled around her. His gaze flicked once toward the horn where it lay half under his claw. The glyphs were still glowing. She could feel the wrongness of it. The pain in him the old note had dragged raw. Whatever the horn's command had been, it had called not obedience, but torment. Slowly, very slowly, Daenerys lowered herself to one knee. Behind her she heard Barristan's horrified breath. If Drogon burned her here, all of Meereen would see it. If he tore her apart, the city would remember the pieces. If he yielded... No, not yielded, she corrected herself. If he recognized, then all would see that too. She opened her empty, burned hand to him. For one suspended heartbeat, Drogon remained rigid as iron. Then the great black head dipped. He inhaled once over her palm, hot enough to sting. His tongue, dark and slick as oiled leather, flicked against the salve and blood there. The terrace did not breathe. Daenerys reached slowly, and touched the scaled ridge above his nostril. Drogon shuddered. Not rage. With some deep live thing between pain and memory. He drew back half a yard, wings rustling. The iron stand lay twisted. The dead prisoner smoked at the edge of the terrace. The horn rested on the cracked tiles with one red band still lit like the last ember in a dead hearth. Below them, Meereen had gone silent enough that she could hear banners snapping. "My queen," Dario said very softly behind her. "If you mean to live, command him now." But command was the language of the horn. Daenerys understood that suddenly, cleanly, the way one understands a cut only after the blade is buried. So she did not command. She only rose with her hand still on the dragon's warm black face, turned slowly toward the city below, and let Meereen see what bond looked like when it had not been bought with a dying man's breath. Afterward, the city knelt. Not all at once, and not all from the same feeling. Freedmen fell first, their foreheads striking brick and dust in the plazas below. The old blood bent later and more stiffly, if it bent at all. Some noble families barred their roof courts and hid behind carved screens. Others sent servants racing with gifts before the sun had fully risen. Fear moved through Meereen faster than any herald. Drogon remained on the terrace until noon. He did not let any man come near save Daenerys. Barristan twice tried and twice found black smoke rolling from the dragon's jaws. Dario came nearer than any sane man should have, smiling as if the danger warmed him, and was rewarded with a lash of tail that smashed a marble urn into powder. Missandei sat in the shelter of a column and watched with enormous grave eyes. Grey Worm took men below to seal the dragon pit again, though when he returned, he brought grim news. "Rhaegal breaks chain," he said. "Not free, but near. And Viserion? Mad with sound, burns his own wall." The words sat like stones in Daenerys' belly. The horn had called Drogon through pain. Of course, it had wounded the chained dragons too. Whatever strange old bond it woke, it did not care whether dragon or man suffered in the waking. It only reached, seized, and bent. By afternoon, the storm had broken apart over the bay into long tatters of gray. Sun poured through. The terrace steamed. Drogon lay with wings half open, drinking heat from the stone, one red eye always upon the horn where it had been locked in an iron chest and pushed to the far end of the terrace. Even cased and chained, it held his attention like a thorn holds flesh. Daenerys held court in a chamber below with all the shutters thrown open. The city was too stirred for anything else. Petitioners came not with their ordinary quarrels, but with wonder, panic, and calculation worn openly. The Green Grace urged her to name the morning a sign from the gods and use it to reconcile the city in peace. Hisdar spoke more carefully than before. Every word weighed. He congratulated her on the loyalty of her dragons, praised the awe of the people, and reminded her that awe curdled to terror, if not guided. Resnak nearly sweated through his robes in his eagerness to manage the tale, to craft proclamations, to soothe merchants, to count how much tribute fear might attract. Skahaz wanted the old families dragged forth at once while they still trembled. "What would you have me do with them?" Daenerys asked. "Take hostages, flay ringleaders, hang the rest if they whisper against you." Hisdar's face tightened with disgust or calculation or both. Such butchery would bring every noble house in Meereen into permanent revolt. "They are in revolt now," Skahaz snapped. "Only they wear silk when they do it." Barristan stood near the door, silent for a time. When Daenerys asked his counsel, he said, "What the city saw this morning cannot be unseen. That cuts both ways. Some will fear you more. Some will love you more. Few will trust you better." It was the truest thing anyone had said all day. When the chamber emptied at last, Daenerys went back to the terrace. Missandei was there beside Drogon with a basin of water she had been too frightened to set closer. The child rose when Daenerys entered. "He watched the chest," she said. "Even in sleep." Daenerys looked at the iron-bound box. "I know." Missandei's gaze slid from the chest to the dragon, and then to Daenerys' face. "Will you use it again?" The answer should have been no. Clear. But final. Yet Daenerys did not speak at once, and in that hesitation, she heard her own shame. If she used it again, the Yunkish would break. The old blood of Meereen might bend in earnest. The sons of the Harpy might vanish like rats before fire. She could perhaps ride that fear across all Slavers' Bay and make every master kneel. The world was full of cruel men who understood only the language of terror. Had not every road of her life taught her that? Would mercy from such men ever come unless dragged out by force stronger than theirs? She sat beside Missandei and watched Drogon breathe. The dragon's flank rose and fell, each breath sounding faintly like a forged bellows. Scars crisscrossed his scales where spears or stones or some beast's horns had struck him in the wild. He was not tamed. He was not gentle. He was hers, and not hers, as fierce and free as flame. When it called him, Daenerys said slowly, "He came in pain." Missandei nodded. "I saw. And the others below, it hurt them too. The child's voice was almost lost in the breeze. Then, it is a chain. Daenerys closed her eyes. A chain. Yes. The old Dragonlords had perhaps used bronze mouths to put chains where reins would not hold. They had made obedience from agony and called it mastery. That was the heart of it. Not partnership, not kinship, not the dangerous trust she had known on the pyre or in Drogon's wary touch. Ownership. The same rot in finer clothing. When she opened her eyes again, the iron chest seemed fouler than any corpse. Near dusk, she went below to the dragon pit. Barristan insisted on accompanying her. Grey Worm came too, bandaged and grim. The broken link by Rhaegal's foreleg had been replaced with heavier iron, though the floor around him was shattered where he had fought. Viserion's wall was streaked black and white from his own fire. Both dragons were exhausted now, but not calmed. They twitched and hissed at shadows. Their pupils dilated and thinned unpredictably. Every few moments, one or the other would lift its head toward the upper reaches of the pyramid, where the horn remained, and make a low hurting sound that took the meat from Daenerys' heart. She walked between them without the horn and spoke softly, first in the common tongue, then in Valyrian. It was not words that mattered. Not wholly. Tone, scent, memory, nearness. Rhaegal let her come close enough to touch the scales at the base of his neck. They were warm and rough under her fingertips. Viserion, after a long hiss, lowered his head by an inch. "I chained you for killing a child," she whispered. "And now another chain has found you." No one answered but the slow ring of metal as Rhaegal shifted. On the way back up, Quaithe found her again. Not in flesh. In the polished bronze of a wall mirror as she paused by the Queen's stair, with Missandei gone ahead and Barristan speaking quietly to Grey Worm below. The reflected corridor darkened. The carved lattice behind her filled not with terrace moonlight but with red furnace glow. The masked woman stood where no woman stood. The last Dragonlords did not fall because they loved power too little, Quaithe said. Daenerys did not turn. She had learned that from earlier visions. The mirror was enough. "Have you come to chide me? I have come because you stand where roads divide. The roads have divided under me since I was born. Then choose more carefully than those who named themselves masters of fire." Anger flashed in her. Easy words from shadows. "You speak in riddles while men die." Nande. Men die whether riddles are spoken or no. The lacquered mask gave back no expression, but the voice seemed sadder than before. "The horn offers certainty. Certainty is the sweetest poison given to rulers. It says, no need to persuade, no need to trust, no need to be loved. Only bind, and all will obey." The doom of Valyria began long before the mountain fires. The mirror dimmed. Daenerys saw only herself again. Pale hair, shadowed eyes. The hardness worry had laid about her mouth. When she reached her chamber, she found Barristan waiting. "I should have spoken more plainly before," he said. "Forgive me. Old men sometimes hope caution will carry the day without bluntness. It seldom does." She sank onto a carved bench and pressed fingertips to her brow. "Then be blunt now." He did not hesitate. "Keep that thing and it will rule you even if you never sound it again. Every fear will whisper its use. Every danger will seem reason enough. Your enemies will make you feel foolish for restraint. Your friends will beg you toward it for love of you. And one day, when the need seems dire enough, you will tell yourself there is no other road." None. She looked up. "And if there is no other road?" Barristan's old face was weary and kind and terrible. "Then die in a truer one if you must. Better that than live to become what destroyed your house." It was not a comfortable answer. It was also the only one that let her breathe. That night, while Drogon slept on the terrace under the stars and the city murmured below in frightened reverence, Daenerys took the iron key from Barristan's hand and opened the chest herself. The horn lay inside on black felt, dark and patient and faintly warm. She looked at it a very long time. Then she said, "At dawn, we end this." Dawn found her in the broken dark beneath the pyramid. She had chosen the dragon pit because no lesser fire would do, and because some endings required witness from those most wronged. Barristan argued for taking the horn to the sea. Dario argued for hiding it and using it only when all else failed. Skahaz argued, of course, that it should be used until every enemy in Meereen decorated a wall. Daenerys heard them, thanked none, and ordered the pit prepared. So now the bronze doors stood open to the day above, letting down shafts of pale morning light that sliced through smoke and dust. The chamber was hotter than a kiln. Drogon had come of his own will, following her from the terrace with a wariness that had never fully left him since the horn's call. He crouched near the center ring, great wings mantled half wide, black scales drinking every glimmer. Rhaegal and Viserion remained chained but restless on either side, their eyes bright and fixed. Grey Worm had stationed unsullied at the doors, and nowhere nearer. Barristan stood with sword sheathed, for steel was useless here. Missandei had insisted on being present despite her tears. There were only the 5 of them besides the dragons, and that seemed right. Too many witnesses and the chamber would have become a theater. This was not for spectacle. It was for judgment. Daenerys carried the horn in both hands. It felt heavier than it had on the first day, though perhaps only because she now knew the weight of what clung to it. Burned breath, stolen pain, the memory of command. The red bands along its length were dark at present, but not dead. When she turned it in the light, she thought she saw a dull pulse far within the inlays, like coals hidden under ash. She halted in the center of the scorched ring. Drogon lifted his head. Rhaegal hissed. Viserion's chain rang as he took 2 eager steps and no more. Barristan came as close as he dared. "You need not do this yourself." "Yes," Daenerys said. "I do." She looked up through the high opening to the small square of morning sky. Pale blue. Clear. Clear. The city above would already be stirring. Meereen would not know what was decided in the dark below, only that another day had begun. That too felt right. Not every choice fit for songs deserved one. She turned to Missandei, read the words again. The child wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and did as she was told. Her voice steadied with each line. "Blood for fire, fire for blood. No mortal breath may wake the binding voice and live." She swallowed. "Here, Master, Dragon, obedience. Here, sound and blood are one. Here." She stopped, her brow furrowed. "What is it?" "There's another line within the band. I could not see it before." Missandei came nearer despite the heat, and traced with a shaking finger just above the red metal. "Break the yoke with fire returned. By blood, unbound." "I think." Her eyes widened. "Your grace, I think it is not only for waking. It tells how to kill it." Barristan exhaled as though he had been holding breath for days. "Then do it." Daenerys studied the hidden signs. The script there was finer than hair, as if Old Valyria had written its last counsel where only desperate hands would think to look. "Break the yoke with fire returned. By blood, unbound." "Fire returned," she said softly. "Dragon fire." She faced Drogon. The black dragon watched her, not docile, not eager, wary. He remembered the morning on the terrace. So did she. The horn had brought him not to heal, but to anguish. If she asked his flame now, what would he hear in the request? Another chain? Another theft? Daenerys knelt. The heat from the floor soaked through her skirts. She laid the horn across her palms and bowed her head over it, not in worship but in acknowledgement, as one might acknowledge an enemy before a duel. "You were made to master what should not be mastered," she said softly in Valyrian. "You were forged from pride and breath and fear. You are the old wound. I will not carry you into the world." Duh. Then she rose, drew the same slender dagger that had cut her palm upon the terrace, and sliced along the scarred flesh of her hand once more. Blood ran hot. She let it fall not on the outer band this time, but into the horn's mouth. The effect was immediate. The black metal drank. Red raced over every glyph at once. The whole horn came alive with a low, throbbing hum. Viserion screamed. Rhaegal reared against his chains. Drogon's wings cracked open, gusting heat. The chamber lamps, though few, burst into blue fire. Daenerys held the horn out before her with both hands. "Dracarys," she said. Drogon struck first. Flame roared from his jaws in a black-red torrent that lit the pit like the heart of a forge. It hit the horn full on. The metal bands blazed white. Ancient glyphs swam and twisted. The hum became a shriek so high and terrible that Missandei fell to her knees with hands over ears. Barristan staggered back. Grey Worm planted his feet and endured. Rhaegal answered with green-gold fire. Viserion with white-hot flame. 3 dragons burned the old voice together. The heat became unbearable. Daenerys' lashes singed. Sweat vanished from her skin the instant it formed. Yet she held on because blood unbound must mean blood present, blood refusing the chain, blood paying a different price than obedience. The horn writhed in her grip as though some live thing inside sought escape. The pale lip at its mouth blackened, cracked, and burst. Then the screaming began. Not from the dragons, from within the horn. Voices, thin, terrible, layered atop one another. Men, perhaps, or the memory of men. The mouths that had fed it down the centuries. Daenerys could not make out words, only anguish. The sound turned her marrow to ice in the midst of all that fire. The red band split. A line opened down one side of the black body. Light spilled from it. Not flame, but a hard red radiance like the inside of a jewel. Smoke poured forth, carrying faces in it, for one impossible heartbeat visible and writhing. A slave with burning eyes, a bearded sailor, a woman with silver hair, a boy hardly old enough to shave. Then the smoke struck the dragonfire and vanished, shrieking into nothing. The horn exploded, not with force enough to kill, but enough to throw Daenerys backward onto the scorched stone. Shards rang across the chamber. One red-hot fragment sliced Barristan's cheek. Another embedded in a pillar and smoked there. The main body of the horn split cleanly in 3. Its metal bands burst apart like snapped bracelets. For a moment, all 3 dragons remained blazing, fire crossing in a white-hot knot where the horn had been. Then Drogon's flame ceased, then Rhaegal's, then Viserion's. Smoke rolled through the pit and clung low over the floor. Daenerys coughed and pushed herself upright. Her palms were burned raw. Blood streaked her wrists. Yet she was alive. And the horn was broken. Not merely cracked. Broken in truth. The largest piece lay half a yard away, its black sheen dulled to ashy gray. The glyphs dead and empty. The red bands had become brittle loops of warped metal, no more enchanted than old chain. When she looked for warmth, there was none. Missandei crawled toward her, sobbing and laughing both. Barristan reached her first and hauled her to her feet with hands that shook more than he would have liked. Grey Worm limped into the center ring, spear ready by habit even now. Drogon lowered his great head and sniffed the shattered pieces. For one tense moment, Daenerys feared he might swallow one. Instead, he snorted a plume of smoke and turned away. Rhaegal settled slowly back on his haunches. Viserion folded his wings. The pit, for the first time since the horn had entered Meereen, felt like a place where breath could be drawn without hearing old chains sing. "It is done," Missandei whispered. Daenerys looked at the fragments. Not quite, because made things that terrible sometimes pretended death. She ordered iron tongs brought. With them, Grey Worm collected each piece and laid them in separate stone jars already prepared at her command. One jar for the largest body, one for the shattered mouth, one for the bands and shards. She would not let them lie together again. Each jar was filled with sand, sealed with molten wax and lead, then bound in chain. "Where will they go?" Barristan asked. "One to the bottom of Slaver's Bay," Daenerys said. "One beneath the deepest cistern in the pyramid. One with me until I find a road no man can walk." "Nagi," He looked as if he would argue. Then he saw her face and thought better of it. When the jars had been taken away under heavy guard, Daenerys remained alone in the pit with the dragons. Missandei had gone to wash soot from her eyes. Grey Worm had gone to see the last fragment secured. Barristan waited at the doors because he would not leave her wholly. Yet for a little while the space between her and her children belonged only to them. Drogon came first. He crossed the scorched floor with a grace that no creature so large had any right to keep, and stopped within arm's reach. His eye fixed on her bandaged hands. She lifted one slowly. This time he did not hesitate. He leaned into the touch. Rhaegal rattled his remaining chain. Viserion gave a questioning hiss. Daenerys turned to them both. She had chained them for fear of what freedom without wisdom might do. The fear had not been foolish. Yet the horn had shown her something uglier than freedom's danger, captivity sharpened into torment. She could not unmake the child Drogon had killed. She could not teach dragons gentleness by wish. But neither could she pretend iron and fire command were the same as love. She went first to Rhaegal and laid her palm on the great green head. Then to Viserion. Both trembled under her touch. Whether from lingering pain or simple dragon heat, she could not tell. "I will not bind you with dead men's songs," she said. "If you are mine, it must be because you choose the road with me." The dragons made no promises. Dragons never had. Above them, faint through the stone, the city horns of Meereen began to sound the hour. Ordinary horns. Bronze and hide, human-breathed, calling merchants, guards, cooks, and laborers into another day. The small, honest noises of a city trying to live. Daenerys smiled then, though her hands hurt and her body ached, and the choices before her had not grown easier, only cleaner. War still waited beyond the walls. Yunkai still watched. The sons of the Harpy still hid in alleys and rich houses. Isdar still desired peace on terms she did not trust. The old blood of Meereen had not changed overnight. Neither had she. But one road had closed. When she climbed from the pit at last and stepped onto the high terrace of the Great Pyramid, the sun had risen fully over Slaves Bay. The bay shone like hammered silver. The city below spread wide and hot and difficult, every rooftop sharp in the light. Freedmen shouted in the markets. Bells rang from the Temple of the Graces. Smoke from cookfires lifted straight into the morning. Drogon rose behind her with a crash of wings and settled on the parapet, black against the sky. Daenerys looked east toward the dust, hazing the distant Yunkish camps, and thought of all the mouths in the world that would still tell her to choose the easy terror. The swift chain, the clean, obedient line. There would be more such gifts. Men always fashioned them for those who ruled. Let them. She had heard the voice of Old Valyria and broken its mouth. Now the day awaited her, fierce and unfinished, and she turned to meet it with her own hands empty of anything but fire.